Oh, no worries. We're glad you're here.
You know,
What happened?
it's 2020, so there's always a story. Nothing is easy this year, right? The longest year ever. Yeah, so I went in. I always do these Zooms in my office, and I forgot. I went to go in there, and I forgot that about 3, 4 days ago, we suspect. Now, please tell me this has happened to you. We suspect that a critter may have died in the heater vent. So we've done the crawl space. We had Orkin come. Nobody can find it, and we've been told basically it'll eventually just go away. so we're hanging in there. Windows are open, which usually really helps. So I thought maybe I forgot, and I went in. I went, oh no, this isn't happening. I can't do this. So I thought I'll do it outside. This is the first time. My husband always does his Zooms out here, and so I thought, oh, I'll go outside, and then realized my computer's about to die, so I had to go scramble for an outlet. So anyway, I'm here. I made it.
I can completely relate. I own my own one of those have a heart traps because so many critters have gotten into my house. So I can totally relate. Well, we're so glad you could join us. And we really appreciate it coming out on a Sunday afternoon to visit with us. And you picked an excellent time period in which to set the story you read. The early 30s have so many events happening, of course, in economics, but there's also culture, art, sports. The period between the two wars is really a rich period. How'd you narrow down your focus and pick which issues you wanted to work with in the novel?
Right. Well, so I typically before this, Sold on a Monday and The Edge of Lost were both 1930s, and actually even share a couple of minor characters, which is pretty fun. But before that, I wrote all World War II. And so the joke was, originally the first book, and we can get into that later, but the reason I even started writing at all was just, a handful of years ago, because I was inspired by my grandparents' World War II courtship letters. And I thought, oh, wouldn't this make a great movie? It's like Cyrano de Bergerac set during World War II. What if it's kind of like The Notebook meets Saving Private Ryan? And and if Spielberg can do it, why can't I? So so there's a lot of blissful ignorance. I was also pregnant, so hormones were at an all-time high. I'm creating life. A book didn't seem that hard. It didn't seem important that I wasn't a reader. So it's been a steep learning curve, to put it mildly. So I started writing World War II, and that became, every time I came across a nugget of history, whether it's, I passed my grandparents with the next novel. It was because I found out there were 200 non-Japanese spouses who lived in the internment camps voluntarily. They wouldn't be separated from their spouses and their children, right? And I'm like, that's how I felt, Amy. So I was like, how come I haven't heard of this before? My dad's an immigrant from Kyoto. I would have thought that I'd be pretty informed. That seemed shocking to me, but made perfect sense. So that ended up kind of inspiring and expanding on the story with my second book. Third one was there were Nazi spies who were dropped off by a U-boat on the east coast of America in 1942. Many people don't know about it. Secret military tribunal. I mean, J. Edgar Hoover, betrayals. It was like a movie, that you couldn't make up. Stranger than fiction. So past that, I kept thinking, I am not going to be the World War II author. I just kept finding something new that I thought, how did I not know about this? So the joke was that I spread my wings all the way to the 1930s because I'm really trying to grow as a person. So my husband's like, what about 1800s? What about this? And then I'm like, no, 30s. Oh, 30s I can do. So that's where I ended up writing The Edge of Lost, the book before this, because there were kids who grew up on Alcatraz Island as family of the prison staff. And 1930s just seemed like the richest period to write about Alcatraz, when you have Al Capone, Machine Gun Kelly living next door to children. Again, literary gold, you can't make it up. And then from there, I think I fell in love with that time period too, because it's not written about as much as World War II. When I first wrote Letters from Home, my first book, you should see the amount of rejection letters I have. Now, granted, some of them were probably because of my skill level at the time. I tried to get better and better and better with every draft. But many of them toward the end were love the story, love the characters, but World War II just doesn't sell, which I think we can all laugh at now. So yeah, my friends now had all my historical author friends had manuscripts they pulled out of their drawers because they were all told that it had no place in the market. And now you can't walk into a bookstore without hitting 1,000 World War II stories. They can't buy them fast enough. So what it taught me, of course, is nothing sells until it sells. And I'm glad I didn't know better when I wrote the book. I'm glad for those hormones that told me nothing was impossible. And it was great. Well, with this time period, of course, now that I came across the photo for Sold on a Monday, which I'm sure have seen it in the back of the book, which obviously shocked me for various obvious reasons. Come to find out, it was taken in 1948, which surprised me. That photo reminded me much of sort of the migrant mother photographs that we picture with the Great Depression. Why else would you have a sign that says you're trying to sell your children? I think we assume in America that would be the Great Depression. And when I found out it was post-World War II, surprised me, and that I think a lot of us, I'm sure I'm not alone here, think of World War II as being a very prosperous time for the country. It is all parade filled and everybody's GI Bills and not everybody obviously, but that's I think the impression that we get. And you don't think of somebody being so desperate during post World War II usually as being willing to sell their children. And so for me, finding out that it was post World War II was surprising, but I also felt like my initial impression was that it was Great Depression. And for my character, since it's fictionalized, I felt that my characters, I was more sympathetic. I understood them more. It's harder to palate, like it's less palatable, I would say, to think that how you could justify a mother selling her children post World War II, when we have a lot of assumptions that may or may not be right. So that was the reason why I chose that time period. I thought that we could understand more of why the mother made the choices she did. Even if we wouldn't do it ourselves throughout the whole story. I hope that hopefully we can all make the same choices that Ellis and Lily and Geraldine make, and certainly not, Sylvia, her husband, her craziness. But at least if we can understand why they did it, I hope that it increases empathy. And I think Great Depression era is one that I think we have a little more sympathy for, that we can think, well, maybe I would make the choice if I were in that position and trying to keep other children fed, or, et cetera. In her case, thinking that she was gravely ill. So there's your very long answer to your very simple question. Yeah.
Cool. I noticed that several of the male characters struggled with toxic masculinity in the story. Why did you decide to use the demand that men be strong and outgoing and successful as a plot point to create the conflict in the novel?
Absolutely. Well, I think of that generation as being very much like that. So I think that was much more typical. I think we probably agree on that my grandpa, was sort of funniest person I ever knew, dark Irishman. So, you can imagine the jokes that you cannot tell at parties, but at the time were very funny. And that, I think that he filled the room with his personality and his humor, but he was definitely, and my husband's grandfather, just coincidentally, our grandparents grew up 8 miles away from each other in Iowa. And we did not know this. We knew they're from Iowa, but we didn't realize everyone in Iowa knows each other until our wedding rehearsal. And they sat down and started talking and find out that their high schools played each other, and et cetera, et cetera. And, and you think, why did Grandma's like, oh yeah, I played on the girls basketball team. She's a tiny little thing. We're like, Grandma, you played girls basketball for the high school? She goes, we said, we're not very tall, Grandma. She said, oh no, you had to be fast if you were tall. And we said, Grandma, why didn't you share any of this with us? How come you guys didn't share that you grew up? They said, well, nobody ever asked. So of course, we should know better. And I'm so happy she's still alive and still sharing her stories with my children. So it's wonderful. But to get back to your question, yeah, I think that my grandfather and my husband's grandfather, I think a lot of those grandparents, that era, very much the same. It was kind of pull up your bootstraps, and certainly not going to go talk about their feelings, and throughout the story, I think that I relate a lot of that to men even today, and definitely women today, but especially men back then, of feeling like the achievements were very measured. So feeling like you had to have that milestone that proved your worth, and being such a class system still, and there's such a discrepancy in that I think that to show that you were valued, especially to maybe a father who's, who you really want his acceptance. I think we all know that dad that you really want their acceptance, and it's very often hard won. And so kind of to have an accomplishment helps in that. But really it was about self-esteem and acceptance really is what we were talking about. And then it turned out a lot about self-forgiveness that they would not have dealt with at that time.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah. And then Lily's conflict is between work and motherhood, and it's very contemporary, I felt like. But many women did join the workforce during the Great Depression just out of necessity for survival. Did you model her on any of the women you know or learned about who started their careers during the period?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting, you said about her being a modern, and I love that. For me, Lily was a bit ahead of her time, but I think she was very true to the period, because it's so interesting how we think of women as, back then as being like, oh, so conservative, and they would never do this or they would never do that. And oh my goodness, where do you think the women got the vote? Like, there were women that were not only willing to voice their concerns and do speeches and protest, they were willing to get beaten in the streets by police officers and put into jail, and have their children taken away, put in asylums, told that they were crazy because they were too outspoken. So these women, I think, have been, this is the reason why we have, as much, individuality and independence stuff that we do today, is because of women who broke the molds. So, as far as, women who maybe had, had children out of wedlock, and so, I mean, this is nothing new. This, this has definitely been around for a very, very long time. It is not a modern day issue. So I think of my grandma as being a Spitfire, and she really wanted to be a nurse. That was one thing that she, I think, was one of her few regrets in her life, that she really wanted to, and she would have if she hadn't gotten married so young. She married my grandpa when she was 19 years old. And in the middle of World War II, nobody knew if anybody was coming home at that time period. So obviously very different time. She wanted to be a wave, which you're probably familiar with, the Navy nurses, and absolutely planned to do it and would have. The only reason being that she got married, and my grandpa, understandably, did not want her waiting on Navy, Navy patients, men that were all, not men, boys, that were all, 17 to 20 years old, and didn't think that, he was, I think, a bit worried, and I don't blame him. He only dated her twice, he exchanged letters the whole time. So I think there's a lot of reason to be a little insecure. But otherwise, she worked later in life, and was, I think she's a bit progressive in that way. So, and she's strong as all get out. So I think I modeled it a bit after her. And I also think of Lily as being a person that, if you look at who she was in the beginning of the story, is not, without the catalyst of the children and everything that happened in between, I don't see her as being someone who would do the things she did at the end of the book. She was pretty daring by the end, but she became stronger throughout the story. So she's not the same person that she was in the beginning of the story, where she was still carrying a lot of shame of being a single mother. And, and she tried to, talk to her boss about getting a column in, but as soon as he said no, she was backing off, and that's not who she was by the end of the story.
That's awesome. I ran across your playlist on YouTube Music. And loved it. In fact, I was playing it in our office, and some of the younger members, some of my younger colleagues were like, "What is that?
It's great music.
What is that music? What is this thing you have brought to us?" So it's a really good playlist. Did you listen to the music as you worked on the book? Because I really do believe that the background music, when you're reading or writing, it does set a tone for what you produce. So did listening to this period music help you visualize the lives for the people in Sold on a Monday?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't listen to it very often. When I'm under deadline, I need it quiet. So I wish I was a person that could let music play. Oh, those people are so cool. But no, I need it totally quiet. So I did listen to some, though, especially when I put that together. And I just thought some of that music was just fantastic. And where I discovered a lot of those thank goodness, for all the bad things of the internet, and goodness knows there's plenty out there on YouTube. there's some cool stuff to find. And I discovered it when I did The Edge of Lost, because I had, in that story, there was a young Irish immigrant boy who becomes a vaudevillian performer. And the way that he learns to do that is by listening. So he learns how to do accents and everything else. And I figured, how could he learn to do that? And I thought, well, what if he listened to vaudevillians from America on gramophone records? And so he would listen to them and copy them. And that's my story. Well, so I thought, I'm going to try to have to look up, because I see all these performers online, but I don't know what they sound like. And so I looked them up on YouTube. Oh my goodness, incredible. Not only are they on there, people are literally playing the gramophone on the YouTube, and all you watch is the record go around and listen. It's fantastic. And some of them are comedians and have funny songs that are just wonderful. And because that was such a big part of the last book, I became pretty familiar with a lot of the songs. Yeah, they're fun.
Oh yeah, it's
don't make them like that.
Yeah, it's a great period for music. There's let's see, the Bristol sessions happened during that period, so it's the beginning of country music. It happens in one day. The Carter Family and Jimmy Rogers get recorded on the same day at the same hotel room. Then you have the different ethnic groups in New York had their own followings. So there's like these great Yiddish records that were, it was a time when niche markets could be filled. And so there's some really wonderful stuff out there on YouTube. I was just delighted when I found it. Okay, let me ask the next question. I noticed that several of the women in the book make difficult trade-offs to keep working and living. Lily keeps her son a secret. Claire takes Calvin to the orphanage. Geraldine gives the children away. Ruby works as hard as she can to keep Mrs. Millstone happy. As you wrote and edited the book, how did you keep from having the novel become too melodramatic and allow the women in the book to function as fully developed characters?
Well, I mean, I'm very plot driven, so I do like a lot of fun things happening in a story. Otherwise, I like them. So as you can probably guess, I love movies. I love to read now, of course, but I do love movies. And so I picture them as movies in my head, and I write down the movie that I see. So if they read a bit cinematically, that's the reason why. And so there's a lot of excitement, I think, in that. I'm drawn more to that, even in books, with kind of more action than more character study. And although I like them to have depth, and I think that with each one of those characters you mentioned, I understood why they were doing everything they were doing. And because my mom, myself, I'm sure, of two boys that are, 14, 17, going on 40, that there's a lot of, I just thought that there was a lot of maternal, I think, theme throughout the story, of course. And the different ways of motherhood, and the ways that each one was dealing with sort of their history and their own sort of guilt or whatever incident that had happened to them in the past that set the course of how they viewed life, their lens, but also, the choices that they make. And, but I think that beyond motherhood and beyond all the things that you mentioned, to me, that was just about relationships. So that's what I write about in all my stories. It really is sort of why everyone's doing what they're doing. So the way that I teach my kids is, so, when somebody cuts you off on the freeway and we really want to hate that person a lot. And they're the ones that, give you the finger and you're like, are you kidding me? Like, what? And then you have to go stop and just think, you know what? I'm going to choose to think that anyone who's truly happy in their life and happy with where they are and is not going to act that way. So who knows what they are going through right now that put them in the mode that they felt that they had to express themselves in such a way, which helps with empathy again. But that's how I think of my characters too. So each one of those mothers, and not just the mothers, but even Ellis's father, Sylvia, even her husband, which you may not agree with the things that he did, but I understand why he did them, and everybody's sort of the hero of their own universe, right? In real life as well. So they know why they're doing it, and they have their own sort of moral and ethical codes. And the only thing that everyone does in the book at times is maybe go over it just a little bit that they don't think maybe is going to harm anybody.
All right. The newspaper business was in its golden age during the 30s, and people relied on papers as a primary communication medium. A couple of years ago, I was I inherited a shotgun that was my grandfather's, and he had made a shotgun stock pad out of the gator off an old boot. And the leather was so old it needed to come off. So I was taking it off, and under it, wrapped around the stock, was from like 1932, a section of the Birmingham News.
Oh,
it was
fun.
the movie entertainment, what would be our entertainment section. It had all the neighborhood movies, theaters,
Yeah.
what they were playing that weekend, as well as like the sales that were going to happen that week in all the stores in Birmingham. And it was filled with all the stuff we Google now.
Yeah.
So tell us about how wonderful the papers were during this time, because this really was a great time for newspapers.
Oh my goodness. So if you read I think I included, if I remember right, in the Q&A part of the back of the book. I'm not sure if you got to that. And but if you haven't, I suggest that you take a look at it, because I do mention some things that happened from the newspapers back then that I just couldn't put in the book, but were just too good. Like, and obviously I wasn't planning on it to be so relevant, but the truth in journalism, of course, is something that we talk about a lot these days, and has never been more important than it is now. But, I think that there are always amazing good journalists, and there's always going to be some bad in any occupation. So I think our news is just coming so much faster than ever before. And then it becomes a matter of and I talked to there's a journalist, I think she's a journalist major, a teacher, that had me talk to a group recently. And she said, I teach journalism. She said, and one of the things we always have to talk about now to these kids is, do you want to be first or do you want to be right? And it is a real dilemma, because news is coming so fast. Because do you wait to be right, but then be the last one to the story, and it's old news and people have moved on. It's difficult. So, but with the 30s, there were times that people created stories that were not true. And, and it's actually hysterical story, of this ghost ship that was called the Flying Dutchman, that everyone was trying to find out if it really existed. And a journalist that claimed he not only found it, that he ended up sailing on it, and it was like a floating speakeasy. So and he described the menu and how much the drinks cost, and what the music was played, and all this, and he wrote this series of articles because they became so popular. Everybody wanted to know what was on this Flying Dutchman, and the fact he found it was incredible. And when other papers started going, wait a minute, there seem to be some discrepancies here, and then finally, he ended up being questioned, and he wrote a note, I think, on his desk and said, "I'm sorry, I lied," and he left. And turns out that he spent the whole week of his story hunt down in a hotel room with a cute redhead. So that's where he was for the whole week, which you can't blame him. It sounded like a fun week. So yeah. So of course, but at the time, the newspaper then was humiliated and felt their credibility was completely knocked down, and had to take out sort of full page in the front page, apologizing and et cetera. So, but I do know, reading through the memoirs I read about the Herald Tribune and all these journalists from that time period. So, by the way, everything is crazy as it happens in my story. I can't think for the moment of anything that hasn't happened in real life. Everything was something that I thought, this is crazy that this happened. Having newspaper editors, that were taking tips, even sometimes from mobsters, the mafia being so entrenched in the business community with the Black Hand and, extortion and et cetera, but being part of also the business community. All of it was just like, oh my gosh, you can't make this stuff up. So all that went in, but the journalists that I read about their memoirs, when they talked about working in the 30s and how they made the backroom deals of getting, even during the hardest, economic times, drinking some scotch, bringing the favorite scotch and talking to the owner and, Mr. Hearst behind the scenes. And next thing I knew, he came out, it was making $100 a week during the Great Depression. And I thought, it seemed so high that I actually knocked Ellis down to $60 because I thought it sounded so far-fetched at $100. But this, you can't make it up. So yeah, that time period was fascinating, and reading the articles, some of it, I slipped in here and there of, being front page news that this bride had left the groom at the altar. I mean, this was on the front page. which sounds so tabloid now, but yeah, it was fun. It was really fun to uncover some of that, finding the money that was stuffed in a mattress, right? The counterfeit bills. They found $2,000 worth of bills in a mattress and stuff. So yeah, some of those were all true stories, which are so fun that you can find archived online.
Excellent. That's so cool. Lily's rejection of security for love was perfect for the world of the novel, and I was really glad she picked Ellis over Clayton. However, it struck me that most women from her generation who were single moms probably would not have gone with Ellis. How do you reconcile the need to write an entertaining story with writing a depiction of the harder aspects of life in the Great Depression?
Yeah. So with Lily, again, that's exactly a good example of one where in the beginning of the story, I think she would have gone with Clayton. And that made the most sense. It was the most practical. Somebody, especially in that time period, who would have accepted her son as his own, et cetera. By the end of the book, it's not who she was. And I think that she was happy with Ellis, but I think she was, more importantly, she was strong enough to be on her own. And I saw her as, just sort of more of a fully developed woman by the end of the book, and someone who wanted her son to be as strong as her and wanted to live by example. Now, if she had not had a place to live already, if she had not had the security of her parents that were standing by her, where, a lot of parents do today and would have at that time period, but there are a lot that wouldn't. So I think that if she had, her circumstances helped dictate a lot of it, right? So if she hadn't had her parents and could barely get by, or thought she might have to give up her own child, would she go with Clayton? I think absolutely. I think she would have done whatever's best for her son. But I think that she had a bit of that ability to be able to choose, where some people might not be able to.
All right, Prohibition and gangsters make out a subplot. Where did you go to get the information about the rum running and corruption that was common in the period?
Oh my gosh, it's so much fun. So a lot of research I did mostly for The Edge of Lost, because of having the mobsters and reading a lot of books and memoirs and watching documentaries. And then of course, just reading online. There's so much good stuff, that I found online. You have to kind of disseminate, of course, what's real and what's not. And, but there's so much about it at the time period that was pretty easy to find. And, finding out where they're making their money. Even the speakeasy, that's all based on true stories. The having a supper club, that I used that one for The Edge of Lost as well, the Royal, because it was just too good. You couldn't, again, having a staircase that's a kind of a secret staircase that runs up and down from the pharmacy, who had pure alcohol. I mean, and having teacups, everybody's drinking out of teacups. So in case of a raid, you just like, everyone's drinking Earl Grey, that's the stuff that you're like, oh, this is too good. This has got to go in the story somewhere. So that was fun to revisit that.
And while we're on the subject of criminals, the orphanage you have Calvin left at reminded me of the Tennessee Children's Home Society, and Georgia Tann's history of child abuse and child trafficking have been covered in both fiction and nonfiction depictions. Did you use her as a model for Sylvia Millstone, kind of drawn?
Gotcha. No, I saw Sylvia and what was her name? I'm sorry, Georgia Tann, as being very different. I don't think that Georgia Tann, I'm sure she was a hero of her own universe. I'm sure that she justified to herself plenty that she was doing right by these children. I think that her line, maybe she started there, and her line got pushed and pushed and pushed. And, and when she's making that much money, but placing children that she thinks are going to have no future with celebrity houses and, and wealthy families, and thinks that she could justify to herself and sleep at night, I think, with what she was doing, I think and then became obviously extremely corrupt. And I don't think there's any justification as she went on and on. With Sylvia, I don't see her the same way. I think Sylvia needed help. And I think at that time period, they would not have known what to do with her other than send her to an asylum, and probably ice baths and lobotomies, would not have thought that she needed counseling. She had the blues, and she just sort of needed to get on with it and get over it. And I think that's why, for me, I think that she obviously suffered, I think, from a mental illness, and whether that was brought on just by her child's death, or, and feeling guilt throughout that. Also feeling she took the blame for something that wasn't hers. and the grief that went along that, and living a lie through all of it. I think that combined, ended up where she was. And I try to put myself in her position. I mean, if heaven forbid, lost one of my children, and having that unbelievable grief, and then seeing a year or two later a photo of a kid that looks identical, that could have been their twin, with a sign that says his parent doesn't want them, is actually trying to sell them. I'm sure that would start messing with your head a bit, that you'd taken this child that clearly is not wanted, that you think, and then you put him in the same clothes because that's the clothes she kept in the closet, and then you start cutting the hair, and I would imagine that would start kind of messing with your head a bit, that you sort of like seeing a clone of someone you lost. I know that my mom, I remember her saying that after my grandfather, who I talked about, who I adored, after he passed away a couple of years later, my mother saw his brother, who was only a couple of years older. They had served in the Navy together, et cetera. So their photos, they look like twins almost. And she said that he walked in the room and she hadn't seen him in years. And she said it made her heart stop, because for a second, it looked like her father walking in the room. And same mannerisms and same voice. And, so imagine living with that, and yet it's your child. I can only imagine what that was, would do to anybody who's normal, would be difficult. Now, I will say this little inside scoop story. A little bit of where that story came from is because my husband's grandparents owned a dog. When they were alive, they had a Scotty dog. Now, when I knew them, they had this Scotty dog, and his name was Max. Well, apparently, what they'd let me know is that before Max, there had been another Scotty dog, also named Max. And before he died, there was another Scotty dog named Max. So before they had him, I should say. So it turns out that they had the Scotty dog named Max, and when he died after a long life, they just bought another one, which of course we all know is not unusual, right? Same breed, you like the breed. But the fact that they didn't call him even Max 2, they just called him Max. They kept replacing the dog with the same name. And so that, we kind of joke in the family. We're like, that's a little bit weird, but cute and weird at the same time. So that actually is kind of where I got my story idea. Yeah.
I have an aunt who's had a succession of beagles named Snoopy all my life. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like cute and weird at the same time. Yeah. So
exactly.
It's a dog. So it's okay. But it's like but a child is a little bit weirder. Yeah.
Yes. Well,
yeah. I'll mention too, Lisa Wingate is a good friend of mine. So she wrote, of course, Before We Were Yours, and Christina Baker Klein is another friend of mine who wrote Orphan Train, who I'm sure we read all the orphan books now, right? And they were ones that I obviously keep in touch with them, but Lisa and I actually share a same agent and everything, and I know that we've had some things in common, with writing the books, and with mine, I really wanted to. I almost thought I was going to write my book from the kid's point of view when I first started the book. And if you saw the cover, you might assume that that's what it is until you read the back of the book, And the reason I didn't is because I felt like it would be Orphan Train too. The only thing that would have been different was having a photograph involved. If kids were sold, separated, try to find each other, that sounded very much like Orphan Train, which I loved. And I thought, I'm not bringing anything new to the table. So that was one of those things that I thought the only way I could write this book is if I had something new to say.
That makes a great deal of sense. Okay, now all of this was some heavy topics: Great Depression, child trafficking, and we're all feeling a great deal of stress in our lives this time with the pandemic and the elections and economic distress. So how are you keeping your spirits up, and what are you writing about? Has the shutdown impacted your writing method?
Oh my gosh, yes. Well, number one, everyone's home. So I'm like, get out of my office. My office is the house. So that is a challenge, no question. I pushed my deadline. And it's, they've only moved it so far to release just a couple months later than we originally planned. It's supposed to come out end of next August, more September book, and now they're talking about it being an October book instead. So maybe about a month and a half difference. If I can get my act together, as soon as we get done talking today, I'll be, grabbing my hot tea and jumping in, and hopefully get some good writing done. But yeah, it's not like there's nothing else going on in the world, so nothing else to clutter my brain about. It's been hard, and I think that there's a lot of authors. We all talk. It's been a rough year for, I think, for everybody. My goodness, we're not alone. But creating, when you have a job that creates from scratch, that is supposed to be creative, it is, and home, and it takes so much self-discipline that is hard on a normal year when you'd much rather play online and Instagram or whatever. It's been a challenge for sure. Luckily, I'm really, really grateful that the boys are older. My younger sister has a toddler, so oh my goodness, quarantining, with a toddler has had its own set of challenges. So that's been great. They have school online. They're doing wonderful. They're still self-motivated, so that's been a huge help. So definitely, I feel for anybody trying to do a regular job and little kids, and I just, it's a lot for everybody. But what I'm writing next is I'm excited about, so that helps. It's just been it's an enormous amount of research on this book, so that has also slowed it down quite a bit. I'm on the last quarter of the book, so I'm hoping to cross the finish line within the next month. But I can tell you briefly, I'm dying to share everything. I think it's my best book yet. My husband thinks it's my best book yet, which says something, because husbands don't give the compliments very easily. It is World War II. And again, I always said I won't go back there unless I have something new to say. And I had an article from years ago when I was researching my other books, but I thought, oh my gosh, this is like a nugget, cool, fun fact of history that I had no idea about. And it's mind blowing. And you share it with people like, I had no idea. And yet I didn't think it was enough for a whole novel. So I kept it just because, and I think I used it for some trivia questions at one point to give away prizes or something. And I had another article that was from early 1900s of a tragedy that happened in Michigan that, again, from a photograph, like Sold on a Monday, I think I had found it on the same rabbit hole of 50 most shocking historical photos you have never seen, So I'm like, what have I not seen? So I went down the rabbit hole, and I think I found this one at the same time and saved it. So sad and depressing. Can't be a whole book in itself. And yet one night I looked at the two, I thought, oh my gosh, this is all one story. And all of a sudden I had half the book in my head within 5 minutes. So what I can tell you is that it involves a secret branch of British military intelligence that I had never heard of before. They recruited very unusual people. They had a very special skill set, and the things they did were so unique and successful that they kept them classified until the 1980s, until like 1985, when they could finally come out and talk about some of the stuff they did, not even all of it. And some of the stuff that they used in their tactics were things that we all grew up with, you have all done, you have all used and played, and you have no idea the way they used them at the time. They were so successful that, and keeping it quiet, the reason being, because the Germans never figured out some of the things they did, they thought they could use them again during the Cold War. So they thought they might have to use them against the Russians. So this is why they kept it secret. And then eventually they're like, okay, we're done. We're really not going to use this now. But yeah, amazing, amazing stuff. And so hopefully I dangle that carrot for you all. Yeah, I'm excited. I can't wait to share more.
That sounds neat. Okay. I got one final question, and then Amy's going to ask you a question. This is the one I ask every author we get a chance to talk to, and is, what can we do as librarians to help writers get the resources that you need?
Oh gosh, I love librarians so much. You guys are just wonderful. I think in one of my books I said that I forgot about this until a librarian emailed me about last week, I think, and said, just have to tell you that I read this book, loved it, and said, and I love that in your acknowledgments, you said that librarians are the saints of the literary world. And I said, oh, I forgot I said that. I still believe that. So you are. Oh my gosh, libraries are so important and wonderful. And I have used them a lot because, which is so incredible, especially even now, more than ever, that I'm able to go online and ask any question the 24/7. And poor librarian, that one time I did test that because I was on deadline, like at 2 a.m. I'm like, I hope somebody doesn't hate me for asking a question right now. And so I've sent so many questions that of just anything that I'm trying to verify. and and gotten resources and answers and amazing. So much what I rely on has been from librarians and libraries and tell me where to read. And then also, oh my gosh, so many librarians that have recommended my book to other readers, and it's just amazing. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, thank you.
I just have one real quick question, which also I'm definitely recommending your book. I already have somebody I'm fixing to email when we get off, like, oh, I have 2 good books for you.
Oh, good. Thank you.
I was curious. Photography now it's digital and it's a point shoot, immediately that you have a good picture.
Yeah.
And I was curious, my sister was a photography major originally, and so I know a little bit about the in-depth process you have to go through to get your pictures and how devastating it can be if something happens to a negative.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Where did you learn about kind of the old-fashioned photography?
Oh my gosh. I mean, there are so many. You go through my whole book, I think, historical fiction, we're all the same, authors. Every page, we probably asked somebody a question about, and looked up, fact checked probably 20 things on every single page, whether it's slang or just a million things that you would never think of, that you're like, was that word around yet? And did they use the word that way? Not just that it existed, but, so when it comes to anything that I don't know, I try to find an expert who does. So luckily I was able to find someone, and I love when people are so generous with their information that they're so excited to share what they know. It's the best. It's such a win-win. And I ended up contacting someone who knew a lot about old time photography. And so the truth is that when they took those photos with those old cameras, they would actually produce 2 negatives. But I decided, you know what? I almost put in the author's note, but the author's note, and I really had planned to do that because whenever I take a liberty, I do like to explain why I took it or just mention it. Because I think there's going to be a photographer that goes, oh my gosh, she doesn't know what she's talking about, But at the end, I thought, you know what? When I wrote the author's note, it really didn't fit. It was so much about the kids and the family and the focus there that it seemed pretty trivial to say, and by the way, side note, besides the kids being chained up in the barn, because that was all true, which is horrific in itself. So all true, that was all true. I thought it just slip in, by the way, the camera made 2 negatives, not 1. I thought, but I did ask him, I go, what could ruin? He said it would produce 2 negatives, but I said, what could it be ruined? He goes, oh yeah, absolutely. He said, for sure. In the newsroom, yeah, you'd have to just, and he gave me examples and he was like, yeah, bleach on it would absolutely ruin them. The print and the negative, so I thought they would imagine how much bleach they used to clean things back then, pour it in some water, mop it, and it just must have smelled like Clorox all the time. So yeah, that was where I got that.
Well, loved your book. It was wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, and before we go, can I take a photo of the group? Would you all mind? If you mind, then just say.
I have anybody have an objection?
No. Okay. I'd love that if that's okay.
Yeah,
sure.
Absolutely.
All right, let's do it. We'll do this. All right, everybody, ready? Smile. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, got it. Thank you so much. Yay.
Thank you for joining us. This was very enjoyable. We like getting to hear from our authors.
Oh, this was so fun. What a night. And I got to be outside. This is probably a good thing. And it ended up being, not only does it not smell like critter out here, it got some fresh air. And it's sunny today in Portland, which, doesn't happen year round. So
I can testify from personal experience that the critter will decompose and the smell will go away.
Thank you. Thank you. I was about to reach out to a librarian and say, when does this
go away? Took a couple of weeks.
Oh gosh. Okay. All right. Well, at least the election will be over, right? No, kind of. So there'll be lots more things to look forward to. So that's good.
Thanks, everybody. This was fun again. And Christina, thank you so much for joining us. We loved having you join us, and we will see you guys next month.
Sounds good. Thank you, everybody. Take care and stay well.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
You too. Bye-bye.